legendary Kathleen Dunn. Camaraderie, and you all know Kathleen very well, as you can tell by the applause. The many years, and I could really call it the many years of service that she did for the state of Wisconsin on our very fine Wisconsin Public Broadcasting Network. Very few states have what we have, and Kathleen was certainly a big part of that. So, at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Kathleen.
Thanks, Heath.
Okay, thanks, Kathleen.
Hi. After 42 years in radio, where I covered politics a whole lot, I had had enough. It's hard to say this, but it was just too hard. So I had to leave. Oops, so I had to leave. And now I talk to dogs. So it's really nice to be able to see people again who are doing things about what's going on in America, because these are very tough times. Just a brief introduction. As I was thinking about this, I went back in history. I always like to do history shows. On July 27, 232 years ago, the delegates at the Constitutional Convention talked about whether or not a president could be impeached while in office. This was the subject of the day's conversation. Governor Morris of Pennsylvania moved to strike a proposed phrase that the president could be removed on impeachment and conviction for malpractice or neglect of duty. He thought that if the president committed crimes, he wouldn't be reelected. Governor Mason of Virginia countered that should any man be above justice, was his question. Above all, shall that man be above it who can commit the most extensive injustice? Ben Franklin offered this: why not provide in the Constitution for the regular punishment of the executive where his misconduct should deserve it, and for his honorable acquittal when he should be unjustly accused? The delegates debated impeachable offenses. They went on and on. They had vastly different opinions about what is impeachable, and as we now know, treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors are what they determined to be reasons for impeachment. The definition is broad. How do we interpret it now? Today, a debate resolved that the actions of the President of the United States call for his removal from office. 232 years later, we debate what the Founding Fathers debated, and this time women can be at the table. We're going to begin by getting a better understanding of the impeachment process. Is it analogous to bringing an indictment by a grand jury? What's a fair inquiry? Can a president face criminal charges after leaving office? Jeff Perzan starts our discussion today, an attorney who specializes in technology, international business transactions, and diabetes-related matters. His undergraduate degree is from Yale in international relations, and while he was going to school there, he chaired the Yale Political Union and the College Council. His law degree is from Columbia Law School. He now heads the state's diabetes advisory group and has participated in many campaigns. Jeff.
Thank you very much. I actually have a very easy task, since I still have the ability to read. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Constitution and offer a couple of nuances. First article, Article 1, Section 2, Clause 5. The House of Representatives shall choose their Speaker and other offices, and shall have the sole power of impeachment. Now, when you say, well, what is impeachment? It's basically where somebody who is in federal office, a high official, is removed. Since they started tracking this, there have been 62 instances of the House beginning impeachment inquiries. There have only been 19 impeachments. 15 judges, so I guess the lawyers are leading the pack in this one, although I don't know if it's honorable or not. There have been 2 presidents that have been impeached, one Secretary of War, so we took care of that position over time, and initially there was 1 senator from the U.S. Senate who was impeached. Of all of that, there have only been 8 convictions and removals from office. So it's not something that is done lightly. Back to Article 1. Section 3, Clause 6. The Senate shall have the sole power to try all impeachments. When sitting for that purpose, they shall be on oath or affirmation. Now you might ask, well, what does that mean? It basically says that they have to do the right thing and they have to uphold the principles of the Constitution and of their office. So for some senators, that may be a very interesting sort of thing if they have to take this oath and with whatever it is they're going to be doing. When the President of the United States is tried, the Chief Justice, and we're talking about the Supreme Court of the United States, shall preside, and no person shall be convicted without the concurrence of 2/3 of the members present. Now, we heard a lot about 67 votes are necessary, that 20 Republicans would have to switch, assuming all the Democrats would choose to impeach. That is actually not true. You could be impeached with as few as 3 people in the Senate chamber who happen to be present. And it will be interesting because the Senate rules lately have been very flexible. And the Senate rules, as controlled by the gentleman from Kentucky, have been somewhat fluid recently. So that could be very interesting. I'll just bring up one point. If it's not the president, if it's for anybody else, the person who chairs the impeachment is actually the vice president. And so there's an interesting query as to what happens if Pence is impeached. Would he be able to rule in his own trial in the Senate? I don't know. It's never been presented before. All right, moving on. Judgment in cases of impeachment, this is Clause 7, shall not extend further than to removal from office and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States. But the party convicted shall nevertheless be liable and subject to indictment, trial, judgment, and punishment according to law. We've heard some discussion about, oh, well, it hasn't had a chance to confront the accusers and stuff like that. That is not necessary for impeachment. Going on to sort of the procedure, once we get into the Senate, we go to Article 2, Section 2. The President shall have power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in the cases of impeachment. So the founders really determined that would not be appropriate. Section 4, the President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the U.S. shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of, and here are the key words as mentioned earlier, treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. And this is a very flexible sort of thing. There has been some legislation that's been passed that what this means, it includes without exclusion, improperly exceeding or or abusing the powers of the office. Second thing is behavior incompatible with the function and purpose of the office. And I will mention that Andrew Johnson, his article of impeachment well over 150 years ago, one of them said that he was talking badly about Congress. And that was one of the articles. They believed that they were disrespecting the office. So, from a standard standpoint, it could be a lot of different things. And then the final one is misusing the office for an improper purpose or for personal gain. I hear some murmurs in the crowd. Interestingly enough, Nixon was talked about being impeached on this clause. He resigned before anything happened, but it was determined that filing of false tax charges prior to him becoming president was not an impeachable event. The rules for impeachment go back to Jefferson, and in 1801, he wrote something which is called the Jefferson Manual. And that has been followed largely by the House and how they conduct themselves. They've also had some clarification under House practices in 1974. That was in the era of Nixon. And then the Senate has their own rules and procedures, which were last extensively revised in 1986. So one final thought. The Supreme Court has determined that a formal resolution on impeachment is not required in order to impeach. You've heard something about that today. So with that, the easy part is over, and I'll turn it back over to our moderator.
Thank you. On to the debate, and here's what we're going to hear. 4-minute opening statements from our debaters, then 8 minutes of supporting evidence from each, and then a 4-minute rebuttal, 2-minute each closing statements, and finally a question-answer segment where our debaters and our historian will also participate. And just a reminder that if you have those cards that were given to you, pass them along to Shirley.
Or anybody.
Or anybody.
We'll collect them.
To collect them before we get to that part of the afternoon's event. I'll introduce our debaters one at a time so you can remember them accurately before they speak. Dr. Robert Kraig is the Affirmative position, Executive Director of Citizen Action since 2009. He is a leading strategist in the Wisconsin Progressive Movement, appears on major national and international media outlets, and is a panelist on the PBS program International Focus. He's the author of Woodrow Wilson and the Lost World of the Oratorical Statesman, former Wisconsin State Council Director for the Service Employees International Union. His PhD is from Madison, master's from the University of Georgia, and bachelor's from the University of Pittsburgh. Dr. Kraig.
Hey, good evening, everyone. And we're going to try to, I think this is a solemn issue, and so we should try to very dispassionately consider the issues and give my worthy opponent, Dr. Wasserman, every opportunity to make the case, because we as progressives actually weigh the pros and cons of cases. We don't just make decisions willy-nilly based on partisan advantage. So to prove the affirmative case here, I think what has to be established is that not only that President Trump has engaged in impeachable offenses, and I would say convictable, in other words, removal from office in the Senate side, but also that this is the best remedy, that this is the approach that ought to be taken. And just to say a little bit about the very able presentation by Jeff about impeachment, and it goes back actually into English law and English practice for a long time. It is really about public violations of public trust and public office, what you might call public crimes. It's not about the criminal statute code or its evolution over time. It is about someone abusing office. And the reason it was put in the Constitution in the end is because the people who framed it were very worried about tyranny and kings for obvious reasons. And they were very worried that a president who had a lot of executive authority, which they thought needed to happen, could abuse it and could end the republic. And Ben Franklin had famously said about what we'd created, he told a woman, we have a republic if you can keep it. And this is about keeping it. And it's pretty clear, most historians agree, that the Constitution had never been ratified without this clause because people were so concerned about creating a king or kind of some authoritarian country. And so it doesn't have to do, this is why the Mueller report's misleading, it doesn't have to do with the interpretation of a particular statute, a particular time, and what conspiracy is or is not. It is something higher than that. It is the role and, in fact, the duty of the House of Representatives and the Senate to remove a president from office who has abused that trust dramatically. And in fact, in this case, I'm going to argue with President Trump, not only has he abused his trust, he's threatened the whole future of our republic by undermining the checks and balances within it. And I'm going to describe how what has happened with Ukraine, if allowed to stand, would actually allow a president to use the full power of the most powerful office in the world in presidential elections, which means we wouldn't have free and fair elections anymore, and we wouldn't have a functioning republic. And the emoluments violations, which will be my second argument, are similar. And these are also within the Constitution. And the reason they're there is because they were very worried that the president and other elected officials become the basically agents of big foreign powers like France or Great Britain, and that would mean they would not operate in the public interest and would undermine a Republican form of government. And so there's also very clear emoluments clause violations that Mr. Trump is definitely impeachable for. And so what I want to kind of close on here for the opening is that we really shouldn't be considering politics here. It's supposed to be political in the sense that they invested the power of impeachment with the only House that was democratically elected by the people at the time. The Senate was not, and the President was not, if you think about the original Constitution. And so they did want it to be close to the public. But at the same time, what they also wanted is something that was not simply a judgment about political advantage. They wanted them thinking about had the president committed public crimes, high crimes and misdemeanors, or treason or bribery at a level that was a threat to the structure of our republic. And what you need to think about here is that if we do not impeach President Trump for these things, and we have set a precedent, right, for not using the impeachment clause for this purpose. The other thing is, some say the election. We wait for the election. Well, the framers could have let the election take care of it. Presidents have 4-year terms. Obviously, what could happen is an authoritarian president could actually win re-election, and then what kind of democratic republic would you have left? Election is not sufficient because you don't necessarily, a president who commits high crimes and misdemeanors will not necessarily lose re-election. And so those are both inappropriate. Now, what is also inappropriate is some sort of advantage from the other side, from the side that may want impeachment, that's in opposition, that it's not to their political advantage, that they could lose the election by trying. I want to say this is much higher than that, and that's why we should be solemn about this. This is about a constitutional responsibility in preserving the republic. And so think about the precedent of not acting on these series, and I've only listed 2 of them, of impeachable offenses that the president has committed. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Wasserman. First to the moderator for the introduction.
Thank you. The negative position, Dr. Sheldon Wasserman, who serves on the Milwaukee County Board of Supervisors, now in his 2nd term, representing Milwaukee County's 3rd District. He serves as Vice Chair of the Parks, Energy, and Environment Committee, and on the Health and Human Needs and Finance and Audit Committee. Served in the Wisconsin Legislature, representing the 22nd Assembly District for 14 years, and then was appointed by Governor Doyle to the Wisconsin Medical Examining Board. He's a doctor of obstetrics and gynecology. Dr. Wasserman.
Thank you very much, Kathleen Dunn. I've been a fan of yours for years, and it's a pleasure having you here this evening. I also want to thank Grassroots for putting this together tonight. Keith Schmitz and, of course, Shirley Horwitz do a great job, as well as the rest of the team. So the big question I think everybody has right now, besides the entire impeachment battle, is one thing. Why are you up there, Wasserman? What are you doing? Do you really oppose to impeachment? I mean, that's the big question here. And I think that it comes down to a really simple question. Do I want Trump as president? Absolutely not. So are you going to have a big debate between Dr. Kraig and myself here about the fitness of Trump for office? Absolutely not. I mean, I can't stand here and support that type of position. In medical, I know lawyers debate issues. Physicians really don't debate issues. We look at truths, and we do the best we can for our patients. And there's like a right way, and there's a wrong way, and there are gray areas. But do I want Trump as president? Absolutely not. So how did I really get up here? One reason why I got up here. We couldn't find anybody else. That's one. And the second part of it, I received a phone call from Shirley Horwitz. And when Shirley calls, how do you say no to her? You can't. So I'm here on behalf of Shirley Horwitz, and I think it's important that we do have a debate. but my positions will not be strong because I don't want Trump as president. Absolutely. Now, the second thing I have to say is I do want to make one correction in the emails and the newsletters and all the posters. That is a picture of me from 20 years ago. I don't look like that anymore. I look at State Representative Barb Notstein. When I ran for office the first time, that's what I looked like back there when I served with Representative Notstein. So I do want to correct that photograph. Now, where do I get started on this whole issue about impeachment? I think our guide and the person who I really look at is our Speaker, Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi has taken a pragmatic and, I have to say, political approach to this issue. I strongly disagree with one thing Dr. Kraig said, is the issue that it should not be political. All politics are political. All impeachments are political. Anything we do in the legislature or in Congress, everything a politician does is political in some way or another. A lot of people, I learned very quickly when I ran for office, when I was elected to office, it was me, myself, and I, then it was party, and then it was everything else. But constituents were last. And that may seem very sour, and that may be not the right way to say things, but politics are like that. And we as progressives, we as Democrats, really were different than Republicans, but even some of us felt very much that was getting elected in office was really the way to go. So where do we go with Trump? Where do we go? Why do I support Pelosi's approach? Because in the era of politics, in the era of what we're dealing with today, is we cannot have another Republican president. We don't want Trump, and we don't want Pence. To put Pence in office on November 3rd, when people go to the ballot and they don't see Trump, we're in trouble. And at the end of the day, I'm all for ideals, I'm all for, for policies, but at the end of the day, I want Trump on November 3rd. Because on that day, we can come back and take over the Senate, we'll take over the White House, because normal people will not vote for an abnormal person named Trump. And we have to do that. So I don't want to do anything to jeopardize that. Now, do I support Pelosi's impeachment hearings? Absolutely. Should we explore this? Should we look at all the different things he does? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, I want one name on that ballot. Donald Trump, November 3rd, against our candidate, because we are going to win, and we're going to win big. So my answer is political. Because I am a politician, I'm also a pragmatist. I know what happens when we lose. When we lost Walker and our big recall effort, we were devastated. And the unions in the state of Wisconsin and the progressive movement have been set back years and years because our energy and our enthusiasm went in the wrong direction. I don't want this to happen again. So let's carry on this debate.
And now our format calls for 8 minutes of supporting evidence from each of our debaters. And we'll start with you, Robert.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. So, just to quickly, before I go into the evidence, to say a little bit about what Dr. Wasserman said, I think that the founding fathers, the founders, we should call them that rather than making them gendered, the reason they put the question of impeachment in the only directly elected representatives, the House of Representatives, was because it would be close to public opinion. So it would be in the realm of the political. The distinction I'm making is just flat out partisan politics, that is, whatever is to my partisan's advantage, versus a kind of higher question about the future of the republic, okay, and whether we can allow certain offenses to stand even if they are to our short-term advantage. But obviously, there's a political element to this. I'm giving a different definition that falls into the domain of the political. So let me lay down the evidence, and this will explain in a way why this is, why it's so important to move forward with impeachment and removal. I'll go through the three major cases I want to offer up very quickly. One is the one in the news right now around Ukraine, and around the president of Ukraine, and around the holding up, we have smoking gun evidence, we have an actual document, an actual report on the president's phone call that shows the president tried to use the full foreign policy might of our country, that is military aid, against a desperate country, a weaker country that needs the aid, in order to get dirt on his political opponent, one of the main candidates for president, Joseph Biden. And that if that's allowed to stand, the use of the full power, the foreign policy of this country, its purse strings, the military aid it has to offer to intervene in our elections, then literally we will not have a functioning republic, because the incumbent president will literally be in a position, not only for themselves, but even for a successor, like a vice president. So even if they're limited by 2 terms, they could have a successor they would also use the presidency to intervene for. We already have big money elections that are unfair at many levels, but this leads to a completely unsupportable position. And it's impeachable, it's a high crime and misdemeanor, because it is literally a violation of the public trust. It is literally using the power of office, as Jeff was pointing out, for personal purposes and gain, for their own political advantage and gain, rather than for the interest of the people and the interest of the country. So it's a very fundamental violation. It's a very serious threat to the future of this republic. And the evidence is overwhelming already, and more is coming out every day for this one. So if we don't do this, just think about the precedent, and think about not being able to impeach future presidents to do this, even being held up as some sort of justification in the future, which will happen if we do not impeach on this ground. The second would be, as I mentioned, the emoluments clause violations are completely unprecedented. They're clear in the Constitution. A president is not allowed to benefit personally from foreign countries, foreign leaders, in any way, in any small way, cannot receive payments, he or she, at all. And they cannot receive any benefit. And here we have foreign leaders staying in the president's hotels. We have the president hiding his taxes, and the president, that we don't even know how much money he's making. We know he's even using our foreign policy to try to get foreign leaders to meet at his various golf courses. This happened with the Irish Prime Minister, just for example. And so the situation is outrageous, quite frankly, and I know that as far as President Biden's son goes, his children are trying to take advantage, and he and members of his staff have encouraged various other countries and other leaders to take advantage of things that his children are involved in. And so this is very, very serious. And again, it's the same thing. It's a kind of public crime that was meant by high crimes and misdemeanors. And emoluments was specifically in the Constitution and prohibited in all regards. And in addition, it's a threat to the future of the republic, because literally it's a step towards the Russian oligarchs. We saw what happened in Russia after the fall of communism. Basically, a few private actors came in and looted the country and have impoverished it for their own benefit. In fact, Trump is working very much with those folks. So the third thing I would say that is absolutely impeachable still, despite the confusions in the Mueller report, as I said, the Mueller report, despite what a great public servant he has been, did a disservice. It did a great disservice because it made everything about the violation of a criminal statute, a criminal statute around whether or not he was literally involved in conspiracy with Russia during the election, and a burden of proof that was overwhelming. They had to have a set plan, because this is what the statute says, and I have no reason not to believe Mr. Mueller that that's the case. The problem is that high crimes and misdemeanors is not about the wording of a criminal statute at a given time. If it was, an abusive president could change the laws so they didn't violate them. It has to not be dependent upon the structure or interpretation of any given statute, okay? And so Kenneth Starr, in the very illegitimate impeachment of President Clinton, actually made a report to Congress where he argued for impeachment. And Robert Mueller could have done this, but instead, he simply exonerated him from a federal crime that he then said you cannot even prosecute him for because of the Department of Justice's position that you can't prosecute or indict a sitting president, so why have that investigation if it's not possible anyway, right? And gave the Congress no guidance, creating a murkiness that President Trump and his partisan supporters have used to confuse the public dramatically. So, but Independent of that, and what he did do, and what is clear, is he welcomed foreign interference, which is a very threatening thing. He welcomed it and it happened. That's what we know. That is impeachable, beyond any of the evidence of there having an actual plan to do so that was written down anywhere. But the second thing is, what is absolutely impeachable, according to most experts, is the obstruction of justice, and which Mueller makes a very overwhelming case for. It's pretty clear it doesn't indict him because of the Department of Justice position. You can't indict him, right, for a crime when he's in office. And that's a reasonable interpretation. It's a 50-50 interpretation, so I'll point out that that is not an unreasonable interpretation. It's just very murky. If you look at constitutional history, whether a president can be indicted, he can be impeached, he or she, but cannot be necessarily be indicted. But if the underlying thing that you were trying to obstruct, justice over, and the investigation over, is itself impeachable, then obstruction of justice is impeachable. That's what there's a consensus around legal scholars on that, and it's clear he obstructed justice. And by the way, that is why President Clinton should not have been impeached, because the underlying crime was not impeachable. It was a private crime. It was not about abuse of power in office, use of the powers of the office for a legitimate purpose that was private gain. It was literally, it was unseemly, it was unethical, but it was not a high crime and misdemeanor. It was not the kind of public crime that the founders were talking about. And so and so with that, I will conclude my presentation of supporting evidence. Thank you.
Supporting evidence now from Dr. Wasserman.
Dr. Kraig makes a great case. And guess what? I agree with him. Who would have ever thought, we talk about founders. Did the founders ever envision a Donald Trump as our president? You know what? I think they envisioned something like him, but not a Trump. A Trump, his first opening statement when he's elected president of the United States, during the inaugural, the first statement he makes is he's the greatest. More people were in attendance of his swearing in than any time before. He refused to believe the pictures that showed that he had less people than before. Everything about this person, when he ran, everything about Trump when he ran has been a lie. He's been very truthful. When he was running for office, he started talking about he was going to shoot somebody. He could shoot down, stand on Fifth Avenue and take a gun and shoot away. Guess what? He said that. He said crazy stuff. And when he talked about his daughter and what he would, how pretty she is and all the crazy stuff he does, fathers don't talk about their daughters in that way, but Trump does. Trump, everything about him. We've seen month after month during that campaign, no one ever thought he would pull it off in the Republican primary, but people supported him. And at the end of the day, the hatred for Hillary was more intense than watching a crazy man try to get elected. And we lost Hillary Clinton, and we have them. So the general public knows what they got. And the Republicans in all the polling know what they got. They love him. They absolutely love him. So, at the end of the day, let's say we go through impeachment. We go through that Senate, and the Senate sits there, and you know what Mitch McConnell will probably do? He's going to adjourn it real quickly. It doesn't take that much. We're in the Senate. We have a constitutional attorney here. Does it say in the Constitution how long the actual trial has to take place? Does it say how much evidence has to be made? What we have to do for all the details and the technicalities? Mitch McConnell can walk in there and say, oh, we're going to adjourn, trial over, just like that. And that's what they're going to do. Mitch McConnell has screwed the Democrats, screwed everybody very quickly, a quick dismissal, and that case is back. And we have our Chief Justice back across the street in the Supreme Court. He's going to get a gavel waving around that he presided one day in the Senate. And that's what's gonna happen. Because the Republicans are gonna line up and protect their man. And they've said it over and over. So what are we gonna be left with? We're gonna be left with potential disaster. And I was one of those people who I'm still so ticked off about watching Walker get, instead of recalled, he stayed in office. He gave him strength. And he got reelected, and he's done more damage to every aspect of, I'm now on county government. County government doesn't function because of Walker. Our state government doesn't function. The unions, and I look at, see, there's Candy at the back. You know, our unions, the nurses, across the board, we lost so much. When I watch the transportation unions and all the other groups, you know, look at teachers. Here we're across the street from Sherwood High School. You know what happened to WEAC? Devastation. Our teacher, our profession has been devastated. I don't want any credit that would potentially allow independents to say, oh, we feel sorry for Trump. Look, he got cleared in the Senate, and all of a sudden we're going to start voting for him. He's got to go down. And the only way to go down is on the ballot on November 3rd. Now, if this was 2-3 years ago, 2-3 years more in his term, then practicality says, yes, okay, you know, maybe we should go for the impeachment. But with the Senate the way it is, with Republican as it is, with watching the independent numbers, watching what damage could be done if we lose, and knowing how we are going to lose this in the Senate, I don't want impeachment. I just see this as a disaster. Now, once again, I support Pelosi. If we could get more information, we could get something out that is even more damning, okay, then we go for it. But we have to be able to look at this from the political lens it is. And to have a one-day Senate trial with a quick dismissal, where are we at? And that's what's going to happen. So, once again, my opening statement will be the same as my closing statement. I don't want Trump. I want him to lose. I want to get rid of him, but I don't want Pence in office. Pence is a Trojan horse out there, and he'll put a new face in. We have our opponent. We have to knock him off, and then we take over, and we get Supreme Court justices that can make a difference for us. And if you look at what's up before that Supreme Court this coming session, all the cases they've taken up, we're going to lose Roe versus Wade. Wisconsin still has it as criminal. We never, when the Democrats were in charge, when Representative Notzan was in charge of the majority, and everything, we were in majority, did they ever repeal the abortion statute? They couldn't. Because Roe versus Wade protected people, and they didn't want to go after the fight. We will lose case after case. Critical things, pillars of what America stands for. So, that's where I'm on this issue. I'm very worried about what we have to stand. And to watch a one-day trial, everything we did. So, thank you very much.
We're on closing statements now, right?
I think we're rebuttal.
Oh, we're on rebuttal now. Sorry. Okay, we are on rebuttal now, and we have, for this, how many minutes?
4.
4 minutes. 4 minutes for rebuttal from each of our debaters.
Okay, so I'll be more formal debate-wise. Oh, sorry. Does it help?
Mike helps.
Okay.
Formal debate.
Thank you. I'll be slightly more formal. This has not really been a proper debate, but that's okay. We're all my friends. It hasn't structured, just not how the speakers have acted. So Dr. Wasserman makes a very strong argument, probably the strongest that could be made on behalf against impeachment right now. That is that you can't get an actual conviction in the Senate because of Mitch McConnell and the Republicans and them loving Trump, right? And furthermore, the 1-minute trial idea, that's an interesting idea. And then it will actually strengthen them, that the recall strengthened Walker, for example, and he spins out, as we all have the experience on this. Now, I would say in response is, well, those are all relevant considerations within the political realm that we're in, impeachment within the lower house. I think that that Democrats are the last potential party of principle in the United States. And if we do not actually act on these impeachable offenses, we shouldn't only think about this election. That's too short a time frame. We should think about the future of this republic, especially since we may really be entering an era that's like the 1920s and 30s, where there's a risk of the real fascism coming on, because we see a lot of those elements. And what will we say if we don't have the courage to stand up because we're worried about the implications for one election? In fact, what would it have said about the Democrats if they had not tried to recall Scott Walker? If they had just let Act 10 go forward? I agree with Sheldon Wasserman, the results have been depressing, but the results of not trying to stop him, like leaving the state, and then trying to use the only thing we had to go after him, recall, as imperfect it was, it would have left us an even worse state where the Democrats didn't have any principle left. And quite frankly, because they did this, they're still much more committed to returning the right to organize and union rights after an election. So I just encourage you to think about this, and think about this on a higher plane, the politics of now and the politics of the future, the politics of what Benjamin Franklin said, it's a republic if you can keep it, right, to try to keep it. And interestingly, Richard Rorty, the eminent philosopher, near the end of his life, postulated that we would spiral into a new kind of fascism, and that we'd be in that sort of situation for 30 years, and laid out some of the elements that we see right now. So I did it about 10 years before it actually started to happen, and we need to stand up to it, and one of the ways we need to stand up to it is to actually defend the Constitution, because it is still our structure of government. It's been evolved, it's new times, but we have those fundamental structures, and there's a reason for the impeachment provision in the first place. And so it's vitally important that we try to preserve that element of the Constitution. Otherwise, we're removing one of its primary safeguards there is to the creation of authoritarian government in this country through a strong person, through a dictator. If we cannot impeach a president, especially one that has committed these levels of crime. And believe you me, this will be used as a precedent in the future, and it will be argued that these are not impeachable offenses because Trump was not impeached for them. That will be the argument. And be aware that I don't think, let me be short-term political, that it would look good for McConnell to do that. I think it would further lay the Republican Party bare as a party of no principles, because they claim they're about tradition and the Constitution, but they don't give a darn about the Constitution if it's not in their power interest to give a darn about it. And they, as you know, there are endless quotes of them standing up and talking about obstruction of justice as impeachable, and no president can do it under Clinton, and now it's just fine, right? And if you listen to their talking points, they're willing to say just anything. We can't allow that kind of politics to continue, and we have to lay it bare, and that means making this case, but making it in the most sober fashion possible. And I think Nancy Pelosi has done a great job, because everyone knows she's reluctant, but she's moving forward anyway, even though she's worried about the politics. A lot of the same arguments Dr. Wasserman made, but she's doing it out of duty. And at the end of the day, independents and Democrats, and increasingly Republicans not actually in office, afraid of punishment from Trump voters, are coming out and saying so. In fact, I think 15 conservative legal scholars signed a letter saying Trump should be impeached, I think on Friday. And the main problem is, the reason you're not seeing that from senators and congressmen is because the polling currently shows that apparently 75% of Republican voters will vote against a member of Congress who tries to impeach Trump or supports an inquiry. And so this is for them pure politics, even though they know these are impeachable offenses, most of them, other than the most diehard Tea Party members of their caucus. We need to teach the public. This is a teachable moment. It's also a very important moment for the future of this republic. Thank you very much.
And we got now from Dr. Wasserman.
Well, I want to make a strong statement right off the top. The Republican Party is not a party of principles. Point blank. I saw year after year in the legislature lying, cheating, dishonesty, saying that they stand for something, and then all of a sudden they don't stand for something. And when you went up to them and you said, you just made the statement, this is exactly what you're opposed to, they kind of shrugged their shoulders. It fits their, and they just, well, some of them would honestly say, well, it fits our cause at the time. I mean, recently there was this issue where there was a bill before the legislature where they're using, as crazy as this sounds, Planned Parenthood arguments on why they should have birth controls should be allowed for women to get 3 months at a time. And they were saying that, well, women need to have independence, women need to have control of their body. I sat there watching this. Somebody called me up and said, you should watch this. It was absolutely shocking. I just wish one of the Democrats would have pulled it, just like said in this hearing, you guys are using the Planned Parenthood arguments. Why women should have control. And here I saw it among them. They don't tell the truth. They've lied. And so right off the top, I have some real questions about the principles of this party. So that's why they really don't care about impeachment, but they love Trump because they want to get elected and they're going to stay in office because their base loves Trump. They'll go off the edge with Trump because they love him that much. Now, the issue of Pence, putting Pence in office, let's go right back to Pence. Let's say we are lucky. We get him off of, and all of a sudden the Republicans say to themselves, you know what? Let's go with Pence. Pence is a sugar-coated Trump. Little sugar makes the medicine go down. How many of us are that? We don't want Pence there. We want Trump there on November 3rd. Now, once again, Pelosi is doing a great job. She's taking it slow and easy, let the investigations go on. I don't know how much time it's going to take. I hope it takes more time. And I think that as time goes on, the arguments will be made more and more. But I would want a deliberative approach, and I think she's being deliberative, and we can come up with something even more deliberative and more details and more information. The American public will catch it, and we are also standing up because we are the principled party, because we believe in deliberative approach, we believe in gathering data, we believe in making a true argument for impeachment. So we have work to do. We have time to do, but we are the party of principles. And I want those principles to be in office. I want them to be in the Supreme Court. I want them on the in the White House. Because we need somebody who's honest and fair, and we need government that cares about people, who supports people, that believes in safety nets, and believes in a progressive vision for the future. And that's where I'm coming from.
Just a reminder, we're going to be going to question and answer, so if you have cards, if you want to get them up here as soon as possible, we'll be going to those very shortly. We have reached the point of 2-minute closing statements now, and we will start with you.
I don't think it's acting on principle to act out of fear of the political consequences. And I think one of the weaknesses of the modern Democratic Party, which we need to get over, is the obsession with just trying to win the next election, and to do so by avoiding the tough decisions. And so this is a duty. This is about whether we can keep the republic or not. And as advocates of free speech, unlike the other side, we've got to believe that the better argument, the more principled stand, will also be to your political advantage over time. If we don't believe that, we oughtn't to have a republic. We should just figure out what elite educated folks should actually safeguard and run the country, which is something the framers were very worried about as well. They didn't know if we could have a large-scale republic like this. And so I just think we're at a turning point. It's not unlike climate change, where we're going to have to literally do things now where we're creating a Holocaust, a genocide, right? A climate genocide. In this case, what kind of republic will we have if none of the things I've listed or other things I have not that Donald Trump has done are not impeachable offenses? because these are violations of authority and power and abuses of office that concern the founders. And let me make a conservative argument, like the Republican Party ought to make, but they're no longer a conservative party. Edmund Burke, the great conservative thinker in the late 18th century, thought that the reason you had regard for tradition was because the people who decided things previously, and then the tradition of it being done year after year, decade after decade, was a kind of higher wisdom, that there were good reasons, that we should give some deference to all of that decision-making and thinking. Well, the framers made a lot of mistakes. The Second Amendment's poorly worded, just for example. But in terms of impeachment, they were right, that you had to have a mechanism to remove a president that would take the power of the office, which then was not nearly as powerful office as now. Do you know how terrified they would have been of an office this powerful? They weren't talking about anything this powerful that can't stop that person from taking that power for themselves and arrogating themselves for personal gain and political gain. Because at the end of that, you don't have democratic government anymore. And so I think we have to act on that principle. I think it will, in the end, be to our political advantage to do so. And I think House Speaker Pelosi has done a very good job. But now what's going to happen is that the evidence is overwhelming on the Ukraine count, my first count. He's going to be impeached. If he had any kind of exculpatory evidence, it would have been out there by now. And the whole question is, as more and more Republicans are independently minded, the ones who are first Republican and not first for Trump, which is not the majority, but is a big number, they're moving more and more in the polls against Trump. And that makes it very hard, because in Watergate, where Nixon was not even impeached for what he should have been impeached on, which was the illegal deal to win the 1968 election with North Korea, and then the illegal bombing of Cambodia. But Nixon moved and didn't, because he was going to be impeached, but it was only a few Republicans. In the end, a very small percentage of Republicans ever voted for impeachment in committee. So I would just tell you that this is a solemn moment, and it's time for Democrats to actually stand up for the future of this country.
Thank you. Closing statements now by Wasserman.
Our republic will survive Trump. He's done damage to us domestically and with our international relations terribly. It's been an embarrassment. Even when the Chinese are talking about how they're holding their nose to the next election, I mean, everybody else is too. Europe, the entire world is waiting for another election to get rid of him. They don't want Pence, they just want a new change. They want normal human beings in office. So right off the top, that's what we're waiting for. I don't think we're ready for impeachment yet. I think that we as Democrats will always be a party of principles. Nothing will take that away from us. We're taking the time and we're taking the effort with Pelosi leading the way in the House. And at the end of the day, I really support Pelosi. If she comes up with the final articles of impeachment, I'm for her. But let's look at one point real quickly. On the emollient clause, where we always talk, we thought we had this big win on this thing. The courts have ruled in Trump's favor. And at the end of the day, the Supreme Court's going to rule in his favor because he's loaded the Supreme Court. Here's a clear case where he has violated the Constitution. And guess what? He's getting away with it. He's going to get away with impeachment. He's going to get away with Senate conviction. But he won't get away from November 3rd, 2020. Because on that day, he's out. And he's going to go down, and he's going to be a one-termer. We got to get rid of him. And all the energy and all the effort that we have built up should be spent on that day of knocking him off and all the people who believe in his causes. That's where our energy and that's where our money and our time should be going to. So, thank you very much for putting this on. Grassroots always does a great job. Kathleen does always, and I really appreciate Dr. Kraig, he does a great job.
You're not done yet. Hold on a minute.
I hope it's done.
Thanks to both of our debaters and our historian. It was a very informative presentation and a lot to think about. We just want to make one announcement. We forgot earlier to mention Grassroots South Shore And David Weingrod, are you here, David? Thank you for being here. There's David. Thanks, David. We're going to get to question answer, and some of these will be directed to specific people on the panel, so everybody doesn't need to answer every question. I'm going to combine two of these. One includes one that I have. Jeffrey Toobin recently wrote this week in the New Yorker, one way of looking at Trump's evolution from candidate to president, from Mueller to Schiff, is that his abuses are accelerating with each unpunished act, serving as a license for more. The Constitution gives Congress the tools to halt this cycle in Trump's out-of-control presidency. The question now is whether the people's representatives will use them, combined with what does it matter if we lose the impeachment? Shouldn't trying to impeach in terms of justice be most important? Let's give this to Dr. Wasserman first, unless everybody wants to respond. Dr. Wasserman?
You know, I think I think if you have watching Trump is also like being a parent, or you're watching your child out of control, and the behavior gets worse and worse. You have an unruly, or a teacher, you have an unruly child in your classroom, and you want to stop him or stop her. And this person's had timeouts, and if you look at Trump's history, his father tried to stop him. When he was a little boy, he was out of control. His father sent him to military school to teach him a lesson. What did he do? It didn't work, exactly. It didn't work. He got worse. And if you look at what he's been doing, he's been getting crazier and crazier. The comments are getting nuttier and nuttier. I'm really concerned, even if, let's say, I'm opposed to impeachment, November 3rd, when he loses the election, from November 3rd to January 20th, I am very worried. And you're going to hear it here first. I am terrified what's going to happen because I think he's going to go nuts. So we have a problem now with impeachment. If he starts thinking the Senate's going to go, he's going to start losing the Senate, and all of a sudden the Republicans and Mitch McConnell's not going to protect him, what are we going to do? So does that say that we have to allow an unruly child to run over, take us over? I don't know. I don't know the answer to this. But we have a real problem on our hands.
I'll just say super quick that I think Mr. Toobin's remarks are on point. Who would do the Ukraine phone call after barely escaping the Mueller investigation? And it's a problem because he will still be president, and if we don't impeach him for Ukraine, what else will he do to intervene in this election? And what can he do with the power of the presidency and with the number of foreign powers that might have an interest in throwing it to him in return for something, because they can make a deal with him. He's a man that'll make a deal, right? And so maybe that would mean that Dr. Wasserman's hope that we win this election, we cannot assume that if we allow to unleash him for the rest of this election to use the whole power of his office and everything he can promise in return for something else to distort this election. So I think absolutely.
A good follow-up to that then, there's no way, somebody in the audience writes, the Senate convicts. What will be the effect of impeachment on Trump's reelection? Yeah.
He will not be eligible to run unless the Senate specifically gives him the power to do it, as per the Constitution.
Really? He doesn't?
If he's removed, right,
If he's removed.
by the Senate, right.
If he's removed, if he is not removed by the Senate,
Right.
what is the effect then?
No impact, he can run.
Right.
But what's the effect on the election? Are people going to keep this in mind if he's impeached by the House and the Senate says it's all right? What's the effect on the electorate?
Gets into politics again. The Republicans are going to see him as, let's make it a clear point. When you talk to your Republican friends, they don't view the world like you do. There's a clear divide that's taking place in our country today. The Republican world is a Republican we don't live in the same world, and it's very sad. The country that our founders, Benjamin Franklin, Dr. Kraig was quoting all of our founders. It's unfortunate, but right now in time, there's a split. People move away, they want to live in the suburbs, they don't want to live in Milwaukee. A lot of them don't want to live in Milwaukee because they don't want to deal with race issues and ethnic issues. They isolate themselves. We're a segregated city, we're a segregated country, both on racial grounds and all other grounds. And I'm giving the things to hurry up, but we're segregated. I think you're going to see impeachment basically being viewed through a political lens that, the Democrats are after the poor Trump. They've been after him since day one. he's a poor guy, he's been acting crazy because he's been attacked. And you know, you have to fight back, and he's been fighting back as hard as he can. And that's what's gonna happen at the end of the day.
This one goes to Robert. Former Secretary of Labor Robert Reich has said it doesn't matter whether Sondland or really anybody else shows up before the House this week or next. You already have the smoking gun transcript of Trump asking a foreign power to dig up dirt on a major political rival, impeach by Thanksgiving. What do you think?
I think the smoking gun is there. And so you get any other evidence out there that Trump and his defenders want to put out there. But yeah, there's the evidence for impeachment is already there. And I think, as Dr. Wasserman has been ably arguing, this is more than about Trump. It's about the modern Republican Party. And we can't assume it's just defeating Trump, that this party is bent on destroying our form of government, and impeachment is our one remedy to try to prevent it and to create a standard here. And so it's very important that we not think it as only Trump. This is now, the Republican Party and Trump are not distinguishable right now, and their voters are not either.
And Jeff, when you look at this historically, does it make a difference to have one article of impeachment, or should you have 5 or 10?
It has historically made some difference because where there have been multiple articles of impeachment, most times not all of them will pass. So if there's only one, you're putting it all on one thing. I believe they'll come down with each type of offense. So there will be multiple articles, I believe. There are 3 committees who have primary jurisdiction over this right now.
I think there'll at least be the Ukraine and the obstruction of the investigation, those 2 for sure, right, I would assume.
What's the definition of treason for an elected official?
It's what the House determines it to be.
All right. From the original presentation, it sounded like the president can be tried and indicted. How far can Barr protect him, the Attorney General?
Barr can't protect him. This is outside of law, as I was pointing out, and Jeff has been pointing out. It's about what Congress, the House, and then the Senate determine is a public crime, a high crime, treason, bribery, or high crime and misdemeanor, period. And there really is not a direct role here for the courts, other than the courts perhaps trying to help get documents for the inquiry. But in general, this is not an area where William Barr can interfere except through misinformation, not through official authority. I don't know if Jeff has an opinion.
Yeah, I mean, he could be indicted by state officials, but whether or not he's indicted or not as president, the likelihood is he would never face trial as president.
So if this, we got a couple of things, scenarios. It could go on, you know, the inquiry could go on for a long period of time. It could end by Thanksgiving, who knows? But what happens if it ends early? What do the Democrats do in the next year if they don't impeach now? What happens? What will they do? What's the path to their victory in 2020?
You know, it's a tough comment. One of the big things that Trump is very good at is he sucks the oxygen out of the room. Where are Democratic presidential candidates going right now? You know, are we hearing about Cory Booker? Are we hearing about Kamala Harris? Are we hearing about Biden? Are we hearing about, Warren? We're not hearing anyone because Trump he loves this whole thing. He's sucking out everything. And, this room should be filled with candidates for presidential office among Democrats. That's what we should be doing at this time of the year.
Annual meeting.
Our annual meeting, okay. So, I don't know where we go. I mean, Trump is a master of controlling the argument. He's controlling the day. He's controlling the news cycle to where we as Democrats are just, he's controlling. He loves this impeachment stuff. This is the chaotic situation in the world that he lives in and what he does in his own head. I don't have an answer. I mean, I don't know where we go. Dr. Kraig.
I'd just say that impeachment becomes either way a political argument in this election, right? If he's not impeached, he's been exonerated, like what he did with the Mueller report, right? If he is impeached, and not convicted in the Senate, impeachment itself is a kind of punishment. And our side can say this man is only the 3rd president to be impeached, and he should have been convicted, and to push it on the Senate Republicans for not even having a decent process, as Sheldon laid out as a scenario with Mitch McConnell. And so it becomes part of political judgment, because ultimately the people decide what they think of all of this.
A lot of people think that Donald J. Trump is mentally ill and unfit for office. Could that be an article of impeachment?
No, in my opinion.
It might have been before that amendment. What's the amendment about?
25th?
The 25th Amendment is sort of superseded, and you don't need to use the impeachment clause anymore. In addition, I think it gives people with mental illness a bad name, because I think a lot of people with manageable mental illness could be very good presidents. This is something other than that. So we shouldn't stigmatize the mentally ill in talking about Donald Trump.
It's an interesting response. Shouldn't Republicans have to take a public vote in the House and then after a trial in the Senate? And we were into grounds I didn't quite understand in the debate. Could it be that the Senate could preclude a vote?
No, the Senate cannot preclude a vote, and no Republican is required to be in the chamber when and if articles of impeachment are voted on. And it only requires a majority in the House of those members present.
All right.
And Kathleen, this is exactly my big point all the time. The point is, this process at the end of the day will be political and is political. Because the Republicans are going to view it as against the Republicans, and the Democrats are going to say it's for democracy, and for the person, and this has always been a key number I always remember. Only 25% of the adult population has a college degree. 75% don't. And I'm not saying that you have to be a college degree person to be intelligent to make decisions about the stuff, but you know what? The less education, not for everybody, the less education, the more political it becomes. And we go down this pathway with people who don't know it's going to be viewed in the color lens of their party, and that worries me greatly.
What about the ignoring of subpoenas here? Is this just something that's added to an obstruction of justice article of impeachment? Why can the Trump administration just ignore subpoenas?
There's always been tension, but the Supreme Court and other courts have held in the past that the documents must be turned over unless it's covered by some sort of executive privilege. But failure to follow to follow a subpoena, turn over documents, people who do not follow that are on dangerous ground, which is probably why the former Ukrainian ambassador showed up and testified.
Yeah. This is a question for Sheldon Wasserman. Why does it matter if we lose the impeachment? Shouldn't trying to impeach in terms of justice be more important?
Because impeachment trials are political events. This isn't a jury down the street at the courthouse. This is a theater of politics. And when you're in a theater of politics, people view things not in a truth or honor type of way. It's a political decision. And that political decision is really a question. I mean, it cuts different ways. I mean, I think the issues of the subpoena, which you talked about before, when a subpoena is issued, it should be followed. Take it up to the Supreme Court. Let's see the Supreme Court make a ruling on it that Trump doesn't have to turn things over. Let the courts start making these decisions. And it goes back to my initial point. Who's putting these people on the courts? Trump's loading the federal court system. Mitch McConnell was pumping one after another through. We're going to see a different type of justice because of this guy. I'm worried.
I want to talk a little bit about the role of public opinion in this. The Fox News poll, 2 days ago, showed 51% approval for impeachment and removal from office. This question is about public opinion. At Nixon's impeachment, the Republican senators listened finally to the people. Is there any hope that Republicans may be swayed by the overwhelming evidence, and let me add, by public opinion polls showing increasing support for impeachment and removal from office?
Well, my sense is in Watergate that if there'd actually been an impeachment and a trial, that most Republicans still would have, on partisan grounds, supported Nixon. But what happened was enough broke ranks to make it seem bipartisan, right, and to show, and so that's what would happen. And I think Jeff's argument that perhaps a lot of them in a conviction would simply not appear in the chamber as opposed to actually vote for impeachment is plausible. Do not know. The problem is, once you get maybe 25% of Republicans for impeachment and removal, it becomes much harder for the rest of them. They can't just say that it's a Democratic conspiracy. They can't just say it's partisan. And so that's why they're trying to prevent the bleeding, why they're trying to make sure they're trying to make sure it's only Mitt Romney and outliers like that. And so we'll see, but I do think that the opinion polls are moving to the point that you cannot assume that he could not be convicted and removed. He might not be, but there's a lot of movement since the Ukraine. Because the Ukraine incident, it's a better, clearer narrative for the public. It may not be more than of an impeachable offense, though it's a significant one than the others, but it's a clear narrative, and they've not found a way to answer it. This answer about Biden and his son, which is usual Washington stuff, but there is no evidence of anything that would justify what Trump did at all.
This really isn't about impeachment, but I think people will share my concern about this and trying to figure out why. This man, Donald Trump, started off as a birther and held on to that for 7 years and made horrible comments about people who were disabled and people who weren't from this country and immigrants, and I mean, it goes on and on and on and on. It's sort of hard for many of us to understand what's happened to our basic sense of goodness and humanity and what the country is. So my question to you is, why is this so hard to beat? I mean, why is it that we're talking about the fact that Trump could win in 2020? What's wrong?
Let me just start. This is broader than the United States. We have these sort of nationalists arising throughout Europe. And so the basic problem is, I would say, at a structural level, that we have a very frustrated group of people, especially people without quote-unquote skills, without college degrees, who have lost ground in this economy, the new economy that conservatives ironically created since the 1970s, that eliminated, we hear in Milwaukee, all of the great jobs that people with high school diplomas used to be able to get to support their families. And there is anger and outrage, and folks did not turn to progressive solutions naturally. It's very easy to mobilize them on the grounds that it's the other, it's someone else who's causing my problem, and that's the cause of the rise of nationalism. And it really is overall the establishment, both Democrats and Republicans, not doing enough for these people and signing on to trade agreements that have actually hollowed out opportunity in this country. And so the challenge for progressives is that we have to show that we have a real alternative that will actually deliver for people. And we have to challenge the hate. And then we also have to challenge the hate directly as well, but we have to also deal with the underlying frustration, which is legitimate. It's the way it's coming out that isn't. And so people voted against the status quo, a lot of them, in those 3 states, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, that turned things to Trump. So we really do need to look internally and look about a lot of politicians who are nothing like Trump create the conditions that allow Trumps and Boris Johnsons and many others in Europe to flourish.
I agree.
And a political question, do you think Nancy Pelosi delayed the proceedings so that it would affect the 2020 election by being closer to election day?
Yes.
Of course.
And will she delay them even further because we're not that close to election day yet?
Yes.
Okay. Here's a question about the vice president. Doesn't Vice President Pence have a free pass even if he has committed impeachable offenses? The Republicans would not allow Nancy Pelosi to become president.
should Trump be removed from office after impeachment, Pence would become president automatically, unless or until, perhaps simultaneously, articles of impeachment were drafted against him.
Yes.
In that case, the Senate probably would vote on Trump first, and if removed, and vote on Pence. Pence would have a small period of time in which to name a vice president, and that would be very interesting constitutionally. But Pence, in all likelihood, would become president.
Let me point out that Trump appears to think that he needs to drag Pence in. And Trump's unnamed sources are saying Pence is involved to reporters, and Pence's unnamed sources are saying he's not. And there's the whole thing about whether he had a briefing book that had the actual conversation with the president of Ukraine. And so this is going to be very interesting. I think Trump will try to drag Pence down with him and is concerned that Pence is trying to cut and run already. Same with Barr. That's why Barr has been pulled into it, in addition to whatever Barr's actually done that's actionable.
If there is a full vote in the House, is the matter moved directly to the Senate?
This House, if it passes by the majority of those present, they will go ahead and send notice over to the Senate. The Senate then, per their rules, will need to accept the notice and send something back saying that they received it.
That question had a second part, actually. If the House is going to vote to impeach, does the impeachment directly go to the Senate? Does the House's involvement stop?
Yes,
In which case, we don't want that.
Let me repeat the second half. If the House votes to impeach, does it go directly to the Senate? The answer is yes. That does not necessarily eliminate House further proceedings and investigations, but at that point in time, whatever articles of impeachment have been passed will go directly to the Senate, and the House theoretically could start an additional articles of impeachment against the same person, but very unlikely to have that happen.
But Jeff, isn't the tradition that the House leaders will lead the prosecution in the Senate?
But by tradition, the House will name the managers of the trial in the Senate.
Right.
Can you explain why it is that in the Watergate hearings, we had the special counsel, everything was funneled through like one person? Why isn't this all being handled by one committee? Does it make it more difficult to have investigations going on among several committees?
In the prior one, it's because the House determined that a special counsel and some of the proceedings were necessary, and it came back to one committee. This House, in full accordance with their rules, have chosen to do it with 3 committees.
Is that a good idea?
They believe so.
The Senate Intelligence Report on the 2016 elections came out last week. Is there any relevant commentary on its results?
I think there's further reason to believe, as there has been for a while, that the Russians absolutely intervened in the election. And we know on the record that President Trump welcomed it. Whether Mueller could prove criminal conspiracy or not, and he had trouble doing that because his investigation was obstructed and Trump never testified, unlike Clinton.
I will add one thing. Ukraine was not mentioned. However, they were never asked to investigate whether the Ukraine had some sort of impact in the 2016 elections.
All right, let's pretend that you're at a town hall meeting for your congressional senator or representative in a very conservative area who is a staunch Trump supporter. Your name is drawn to ask a question, and you want to press him on why he doesn't believe Trump has committed any impeachable crimes. What is your 1-minute elevator speech or question for him? We'll hear from everybody on this.
Okay. I think you would have to go to fundamentals with them and get them to answer independent, because they'll read the Fox News talking points. So get them to answer if would these be impeachable if they were true, laying aside that you think they're false. We understand you think they're all false and fake news. And if not, what would be impeachable offenses? And to be specific at the front, I think maybe starting with, do you think impeachment's in there for a reason that it's vital and that we need to impeach presidents who, violate their terms of office? And then if these were true, would they be impeachable? And what is impeachable if these being true does not make them impeachable? And try to nail them down and try to prevent them from being able to just read the talking points, which started being distributed by the White House right away, as everyone recalls, because they inadvertently gave them the Democrats the first time around.
2 times, actually.
2 times, okay.
I go along with Dr. Kraig too. You got to pin these people down, but they're masters of getting out of it. They're politicians in their experience. You don't get into Congress unless you're good for the most part, and they can finagle a question. They'll sidestep the question. You're never going to press them. Look at Sensenbrenner. 42 years of and all those hearings. He had all those hearing after hearing. He still defends Trump.
And I would say up front this morning, if you go back and look at the tape with Glenn Grothman, you'll get Exhibit A of what Sheldon just said.
Yeah, I would take a different approach. I would say, Ms. or Mr. elected official, pretend that you are the president. Would you engage in this conduct? Why or why not?
All right, been through the questions. One final thing here. David Brooks's name has come up and his column has had a lot of attention, so I'd like for everybody on the panel to respond to this. He wrote, Donald Trump committed an impeachable offense in that call with the Ukrainian president, but that doesn't mean that Democrats are right to start an impeachment process. Remember, impeachment is a political process, not a legal one. Congress is supposed to do what is in the best interest of the country, and this process could be very bad for America. An election can save the country, and inside the Beltway political brawl will not.
You want it? Or I'll let Sheldon start.
I agree. That's my argument.
I think there's a lot of confusion about it being political. I think it has to be a higher politics. I think it has to be about the long-term stability of the republic, not just about one election. And so if Mr. Brooks means looking forward, this would be bad for the country, not just in the short term, but the long term, then that would be a viable argument not to impeach, that somehow it would have consequences for the structure of our republic that were much worse. I have trouble believing that because it sets a precedent that all of these things that Donald Trump has done are things a president can do. It changes the presidency fundamentally. But if Mr. Brooks means it would be a big mess right now and impact the 2020 election, then that's the wrong standard. This has to be a higher politics and a politics about the whole future of the country looking forward, not just one election or one group of politicians at one time.
I would answer, time will tell. It may be better, it may be worse, but unless somebody out there is a soothsayer and can, determine what the future may or may not be based on one act or another, we have to have at least some trust in our elected officials in they are following the Constitution and doing what they believe is correct.
All right, then the final question is, what do you think the future will be?
Nobody wants that.
We're both passing the microphone here. I just know that November 3rd, 2020, Trump's going to lose. He's going to lose beforehand, and on January 20th of 2021, he will not be in office, and that's what I'm looking forward to.
I think that President Trump will be impeached on narrower grounds than he's guilty of, primarily Ukraine and obstruction of what happened with Ukraine. I think that the vitriol from the right, which is way broader than Donald Trump, will be unprecedented. In fact, the removal of Shepard Smith at Fox News is the beginning. Fox News is going to get worse, if you can believe it. And that'll be that hysteria, but the evidence that will continue to come out of this will continue to cause a small number of Republicans to continue to turn against Donald Trump. He will probably survive in the Senate, but I think it will be more in play than we believe. McConnell has already said that he thinks he has to have a trial. In other words, that's not something he would ordinarily say, except he's reading the tea leaves as to what's going on. Probably escapes conviction unless more comes out than we know, like remember the secret server, the classified server they were hiding the transcripts of calls on? What if Putin told him to do this and that actual transcript can be obtained, just for example? Or maybe Erdogan and what's being done with the ethnic cleansing of the Kurds by Turkey is also connected to Putin and to this. Imagine that. Then even the Republicans would have to impeach, but I would still say probably not actually convicted, but badly damaged, already a badly damaged president. If we don't mess up the primary, and if we have a candidate who will actually run on change, which is what many people who voted for Trump in the first place actually wanted, then we will win. If we don't, and we run another status quo candidate, then it's scary.
I would say the future is uncertain, though much warmer. What I hope for is that people are out there with some of this publicity will learn and look more closely and become engaged in civic matters, and I hope empowered.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you for coming. It's just, Nancy.